Try that. Okay, so we're going to talk about three main topics. Key considerations about your company, considerations about the CRO you think you want to engage with, and then Jennifer's going to give us the benefit of her experience about integrating operations and partnering, because this is not going to be a Tinder date. This is going to be eHarmony engagement with your CRO. It's a very critical step in your product development process. And so you want to choose wisely, my friends. So let's talk about, this is me. I've been in the medical device ecosystem for quite a while. One of my good buddies is here. We were just talking about some friends of ours, mostly in clinical operations. So I've been the clinical director. I've chosen over 24 CROs. I've also worked in a CRO, and I've worked as a consultant helping clients choose a CRO. So I felt uniquely qualified when I was offered the opportunity to talk here. And let me back up and thank Karen, Emily, and Julie for inviting me back to ULP. It's been a minute since I was here, so I appreciate being here with all of you. And I worked in a lot of medical specialty areas. Our other speaker today, who's going to remote in, is Jennifer Bolton. And Jennifer's been with Boston Scientific a long time. And we re-met at a conference talking about this, which is outsourcing activities for your clinical trials. Jennifer has a unique position as a senior fellow in Boston Scientific in that she's in charge of special projects where she integrates new acquisitions by Boston. When I was looking at our bios, I realized that we have a lot of commonalities in our background. We've both worked in heart valves, we've worked in stents, we've worked in peripheral vasculature, we've worked in abdominal aortic aneurysm treatments, and we've worked in orthopedics. So even though Jennifer spent most of her career with one company, I've been fortunate enough to work with more than 100 companies. So let's talk about the consideration. Again, it was touted as the top 10 questions to ask. But as I started saying to you, a lot of those questions are where are you? Okay, what are you as a company? What's your business strategy? What's your business ethics? What kinds of policies and procedures do you have in place, if any, already? So let's talk about these. So we're going to go through all these things. What phase of study are you in? And what data are you planning to collect? And how much? What resources do you have? Are you a single person shop? Or do you have already formed a key team? And what about responsibility and authority? Are you the decision maker? Or do you have to go ask somebody else? Because it's not just about responsibility, it's about authority. And if you are a startup firm, the first document you want to create is the authority matrix, because that's the first document that a regulatory inspector will ask for. And then planning. I was telling Steve, my favorite 4-letter word in business is plan. We use lots of 4-letter words in business, but that's one of my favorites. So let's talk about your company. Are you that little fish in a big pond, or are you a big fish? Jennifer's going to talk about being a giant fish out in the worldwide ocean. But who are you? How do you approach business? And by that, I mean, are you going to go for the home run? Or are you willing to stage your approach to clinical trials by just trying to get to first base? Okay, you just want the base hit. Let me give you an example. There's a company you might know, let's call them Medtronic. And they started a big program for renal denervation. And that's where you apply energy to the renal arteries to treat systemic hypertension. And they had a huge program. They hired up, they spent $30 million just to get into clinical trials. And when their data started to come in, because they tried to be everything to everybody, the data didn't look so good. In fact, they missed their primary study endpoints for efficacy. And they said, oh, 4-letter word. And they scrapped the whole program and they laid people off. Well, a friend of mine, we were working with 2 or 3 little startups, and they were just going for that base hit. And they looked at what Medtronic did and they said, no, not everybody failed to get therapeutic benefit. They were a subset of patients in the data that had been published by Medtronic. And they said, we're going to go for that subset. And every single one of those startups had critical success in that base hit. And Medtronic said, uh-oh, other four-letter word. And they tried to restart their program. And what happened was the people that they had laid off that had all the lessons learned and tribal knowledge, a lot of them had migrated to these startups already. So think about what is your approach to business for your product development. This is a very busy slide. The takeaway from this slide is what phase of study are you in? Are you doing feasibility, proof of concept? Are you doing the first 10 human subjects? And the takeaway from this slide is with every increasing phase, the number of patients you're going to have to treat to show safety and effectiveness, or in your safety and performance, it gets larger. So your number of participants gets larger. It takes longer and it costs more money, typically exponentially more money. So define where you are in your product development. And I sort of went around the room and asked you that already. And people have different platforms. I think you said several pillars that you were pursuing. That's a topic we could talk about too. So what are your data requirements? Are you going to be a diabetes study where you have to capture multiple endpoints every day over several months of data? Or are you a permanent implant in the brain, in the heart, where FDA requires 5 years of follow-up and your patients are seen every 6 years? So you multiply that out, 400 patients seen every 6 months for 5 years. That's a pretty big data set, okay? So again, more patients, more time, more money. Talk about treatment intervals. I went to FDA, my very first project. I had, out of a 1,200 patient study, 896 of them were still alive. I went to FDA with 10-year data. Okay, it was a huge data set. Are you going to use specialty endpoints? Or are you going to use generally accepted endpoints like an FS36 quality of life? Or is it something specific to your study where you might have to overcome what is generally done in that area? So this is an important thing that you consider about your product and what methodology you're going to use to demonstrate safety and efficacy. This is still all about you and your company. Who do you have? Are you a one-woman shop? Or do you have a key group that everybody is equally invested in the success of the company? Do you have project management and personnel? Do you have someone who manages vendors? Because this CRO is going to be your partner, but first and foremost, they're a vendor. They work for you. So you have someone that's experienced in vendor management. Roles and responsibilities. What are you going to keep in-house that you have control over? And what is it that you're willing to let go of? Because you're not just letting go to one person. You have this other team, and every time it's distance, you lose a little bit more control over those activities. And then plans. I was just teasing Stephen about this. Plan is my favorite four-letter word in clinical trials. Okay, it's second only to the word sale. That's my favorite personal four-letter word. So we're going to talk a lot about plans. So I never go into a clinical trial without a plan A and a plan B. Usually a plan C, a plan D. Some people, entrepreneurs particularly, say to me, why do I need a plan? It's just going to change. Well, plans are important for a number of reasons. One is presenting your plan to potential investors. Okay, and the second one is if you don't baseline where you are as a company, then you don't know if you're succeeding, if you're hitting any of your milestones or objectives. Runway to ROI, return on investment. You have an enrollment forecast in your clinical trial, and then you have what actually happens. I have what I used to call the N/2 rule. Whatever the doctor told me he was going to enroll in the clinical trial, I used to cut that in pretty quickly. In the first 3 years of my career, I changed the N/4 rule. So you tell me you can get 50 patients a week. If I see 10, I'll be thrilled. And that's only at your best site. Some of your other sites that might have a key opinion leader as your investigator might not enroll the full study. So then we're back to project management and risk mitigation. Okay, stuff, that's a 5-letter word, is going to happen. You need to hit certain milestones as a company, probably to get more funding. And if you don't have a plan and you aren't tracking to your plan, it's very hard to justify and go with your hand out and ask for money. I told one CEO, I said, would you rather ask permission or beg forgiveness when you go into your board meeting? Evolving regulations. Right now, what I do for my clients is help them understand what's going on in Europe, which is kind of tough because Europe doesn't know what's going on in the European Union. And honestly, every month we get a new update and a new delay. Competition, talk to you about Medtronic. The competition did an end run around them. And some of these pure play little companies are still out there being competitors to the Medtronic program. Okay. Now, as I said, your CRO engagement is critical to the success of your clinical trial. And you'll see that some of the considerations about picking this partner are very similar to what you've defined about yourself. But think about who you are as a company, your business strategy, your business ethics. Do you have some quality systems in place? What policies and procedures are you going to follow? Are you more laissez-faire towards business? Or did you come from a big company where you have to have layers of rigor and procedures built in? So what is the resource size of the CRO? If you are a drug CRO and you're developing a device, don't pick that CRO. And the reverse holds true as well. There's a different approach to clinical trials. When I started in the medical device industry, there was no such thing as a device CRO. We did it all ourselves. And that was just a matter of scale, the size of the clinical trial. Therapeutic experience. Do they have experience in what you're developing? Who said they were developing a pulmonary drug delivery system? Okay, if they've never done that before, maybe they're not the partner for you. Communication. What is your communication style and what is their communication style? We'll talk about this a little bit more. Change control. Things are going to change. How is that communicated? What say do you have in the change? I will put big money bet on the fact that your CRO team will change during the course of your engagement. I literally would put $100,000 bet on that. I was helping a company who had never done a clinical trial select a CRO. We loved the people we were engaged with. We had our very first meeting and our team lead from the CRO told us that was her last day. She was going to the competition. And I just looked at my client and I just raised my eyebrows. I didn't even have to say, I told you so. Pricing and transparency. You'll notice that this is the first time I've talked about what it costs to hire a CRO. And it's not that it's last and not least. It's just part of the considerations. Sometimes you have a CRO thrust upon you. You don't get to choose them. If you go through the same due diligence because your CEO decides they want to work with a named CRO, but you don't think they're the best partner, put them through the process we talk about today and really evaluate and document, are they the best partner? So here's what happens with the big CRO. You have a whale, and then you got a bunch of minnows. Do they have layers of subject matter expertise? Same client, never done a clinical trial, was looking to me and my team to help them decide. We had a CRO that was very personable. We would have worked great with them, but the other CRO was bigger, had a bigger name. They had done the exact trial in the exact therapeutic area, knew all the clinicians we wanted to connect with, knew everyone at FDA. It was going to cost a little bit more to utilize them. But we lost the project lead on the first day. We still had 4 other layers of subject matter expertise. We didn't have to go to them. Okay. This is therapeutic experience. Same example. Pick somebody who knows what you're doing and has experience. I went to one drug CRO And I asked them if, they asked me if I could teach them how to be a medical device CRO in 3 days. And I said, absolutely not. I said, but what I can do is share some lessons learned. What are the differences and what difference does it make to your project? So if you have to educate your CRO, that's an extra burden on you. Are they in your time zone? I had a project lead who was in Europe, and every morning at 8 a.m. I would call her because it was 6 p.m. her time. And I would say, okay, give me a rundown of what you accomplished today. And then every night before I left my startup at 9 or 10 p.m., I would give her a to-do list for the next day. So we figured out a way to make it work. I didn't meet her for 6 months. And she was great until they took her away from me because they got a bigger fish that was paying them more money. Is it a specialty group in a big CRO? A lot of CROs have been acquired and subsumed. So a drug house will buy a medical device specialty area. Make sure you have that subject matter expertise. Are they using full-time or contract staff? I can guarantee you they have a lot of contracts. CRO is a tough business to be in because it's never over till it's over, and even then it's not over. So you may have a contract, and Jennifer's going to talk about this. What happens if you disengage early from your contract? Are there penalties associated with that? Turnover. Already talked about turnover. And then levels of management. How many people do you have to talk to if an issue needs escalation? Okay, who's the decision maker in this CRO? Do you have to have a project manager, an assistant project manager, and an admin, and a this and a that? And believe me, when you get bids, that's exactly what you'll see in your bid. Communication. There's a saying with FDA. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. Your CRO will promise you the moon and what used to be a planet, Pluto. But if it's not written down in column A and column B in your list of responsibilities, that's the second document FDA will ask you about your CRO, then it didn't happen. I have a colleague who runs her own CRO. She's very successful. However, she likes to run the client's projects as if it were hers. And many times she will incorporate changes and want to get paid for it. And I've had to tell her very nicely, but multiple times, do you have a written change order? And if she says no, I said, then the client is not beholden to pay you. You're just out of pocket forever, however much that was. So hard and fast rule here. Change control, okay? It's gonna change. Change is gonna happen. Plan and talk about what happens. How are changes managed, not inside your company, but in the CRO? Again, how many layers of people? If I have someone out in the field interfacing with my clinician, and I get word up here that that's not going so well, I'm not going to talk to that person in the field. I want my point person to be the person who has authority to make that change. How long does that take? Because things will change. I put a 5-letter word in here. I could have put lots of things for this slide, but stuff happens. The good thing is you want it to happen in your clinical trial. You don't want to happen in the marketplace. One project we were on, I just found a letter we wrote to the site. We were on patient 86 of 100, and we found out the device we had put in the leg was now migrating up into someone's circulatory system. Kind of a big deal if the implant didn't stay where it belonged. So, but we had a plan, and we had to pull out of the clinic and tell everybody and go back to R&D. So what do you do? And how does your CRO manage change? Do they get on the phone and call everybody? Or do they know what your process is for notifying us if a non-sterile device gets put into a patient? Big no-no. Okay, let's talk about dollars and cents. What makes sense to you as a company to engage with this partner? Yes, it costs money. But I had another colleague who was supposed to be here today. And when you know who you are, and you think you know who you want to go out and engage with, you're going to ask for bids, okay? You're going to have a document that says, I want you to bid on A through L. And you're going to get a proposal that goes A through Z. And some of it you can easily throw out, but they don't all write their proposals the same way. So my friend Pete was the one who dissected 5 different bids down to the granular level, okay? And told me exactly what we were getting for the money. If a CRO will not tell you that the senior lead gets paid X rate per hour for X number of estimated hours, or this other level resource gets paid a lesser amount, you might not want to work with them because you're going to get a bill for $30,000 for 1 month of work and no deliverables have been completed. Okay, and quite frankly, when $30,000 is 20% of your overall clinical budget, you just shot your budget right there. So this is really an important, what makes sense to you as a company. So I've now talked about who you are as a company, defining who you are, what your needs are, who you need to go out and engage with. And if she's ready, Jennifer is going to talk to you about what that integration and partnering looks like when you engage with this critical vendor.
And so a lot of, yes, can you hear me fine?
Here. Any questions so far while Jennifer's reloading in?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We talk about lots of CROs, right? So, let's say, where do we find information? The list of CROs, different geography, regions, different expertise. Do you have any good database to recommend?
That's a really good question. I don't have a database of CROs, and a lot of times I'm asked to recommend CROs, and I usually do that on the basis of experience. But I would look in your therapeutic area first, or sometimes you have a consummate marketing professional like Stephen, and he can guide you into selecting or looking into a CRO. You can also talk to your clinicians, the clinical sites where you're going to be conducting your clinical trial, because they will tell you if they liked that CRO or not. Okay, was it easy for them to interact with them? Did they like the people they sent? Were they organized, or were they always a pain and you know what? So those are the 3 places I would go to initially.
Thank you.
Is Jennifer online?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Can you tell her to try today? Jennifer, we can't hear you.
My microphone is working. Do you have your speaker on?
Oh. Do we need to turn the TV up? So again, I've worked as a consultant. I've worked in the manufacturer and in the CRO. And those are one side of the coin.
Hello?
One of the reasons I asked Jennifer to join us today is because she has that other side, the big company picture. But I think you'll find all the considerations we talked about, those top 10 we hear something now.
Okay, I think you don't have the speaker on in the room, but people online say they can hear me. Can you hear me in the room?
All right.
Do you have the speakers on in the room? Hello, can you hear me?
Hey Jennifer, we can hear you now, but since I'm using computers, I have to mute one and then turn you on our other one, so we can't talk at the same time.
Okay. So you can hear me now then. Okay, I'm going to assume that you can, and go ahead and speak. If you cannot hear me, please, let me know. So integration and partnering. Before we dig into this, think of you're a small company today. You're working with Allison as a consultant, and you've just been acquired by another company, or you're the company that's doing the acquisition. What do you do now? What is your next step? And really the most important thing is partnering with the acquired company. Before we get into nitty gritty of working with CROs in that context, just step back for a moment and remember that change is hard. You may have cultural similarities and differences between the workplace and the location between the acquired company and the acquiring company. Focus on the fact that, lots of things will be changing, especially for the company that's been acquired. So if you're the acquiring company, how are you presenting it? What kind of ongoing support are you giving your teams there? It can make just absolutely a huge difference. Make sure there's a lot of good team building. Make sure that for each function, you've got at least one person from the acquired company and the acquiring company, taking a one team approach, especially because lots of times you end up doing an us versus them because you're talking about this system versus that system, but you're better together. Just really focus on working together. Before I get in specifically for CROs, your integration is going to really be across functional and across company, across the acquired and the acquiring company. You're going to have a lot of integration planning, execution. On the clinical side specifically, you're going to want to evaluate what are each of the studies that are ongoing. Any study, what phase is each study in? What's the anticipated timing until study completion? If you're still in the enrollment phase, how much longer do you anticipate enrollment to take? What is the use of the study data for studies that are already out there, for studies that are ongoing? And then the nitty gritty for our talk today, don't forget to focus on the CROs. Evaluate what CROs are currently being used by the acquired company in the ongoing studies. Which ones does your company have experience with? How is your experience similar or different to what the acquiring company is experiencing? As you go through and do all of your, I'm going the wrong direction here. Hold on a second. As you go over and, have that list of all of the CROs that are currently being used, make sure you have some evaluations of them. Discuss with the company that you're acquiring what kind of relationship do they have with each of the CROs? What's the quality level? How is that CRO performing? Are they having clear communication? Do they respond quickly? Whenever they need to do something, are they responding quickly? Again, I'm a little bit repetitive on this because it's so critical. What phase is the study in that each CRO is specifically working with? Are they working with multiple studies? Where are the study locations? Is it a global study? Do each of the CROs have people near those? Like if it's a task that they're needing to go out to sites for, or is it something that they handle remotely? Make sure you have a good understanding of all of the CROs, all the information about each one, so that you can evaluate that and where it's at, again, in the study phase. How many individual CROs are there? Are there a lot to manage, especially because you're bringing and trying to integrate the product lines and the processes into your company as well as the acquiring company? How many studies is each CRO working with? Is a single CRO working with all of the ongoing studies, or have they partnered with different CROs for each individual study for one reason or another, like were things not going super well, but they decided to finish out that study and then hire a new person or a new CRO for future studies. What contracts do you already have with each CRO? As the acquiring company, do you already have contracts with some of these CROs and experience with them, or is everything brand new? Make sure you have legal reviewing those contracts, especially if there's any that you think performance is not appropriate and you might want to move away from. Make sure you understand what those contractual agreements look like. If you need to cancel or modify the contract, how do you go about doing that? How is it written? If it's a CRO that you as the acquiring company is already working with, do you want to combine that contract with the acquired company into your own contract with that particular CRO? Especially if you negotiated anything that was better as far as price or what they're doing. If you're, as the larger umbrella company, have a better contract with the CRO, then you want to try to move that smaller contract into it as soon as possible. But again, figuring out what's appropriate for each individual study. I keep repeating, what phase is the study in? If the study is in follow-up phase and the follow-up is only 1 year, doesn't really make sense to make any changes at that time point. Or if follow-up is 5 years and you haven't had the experience with the CRO has been poor, then maybe you go ahead and switch for the final 5 years of follow-up. Or you say, well, it's just for follow-up, things are going well enough for that. Let's keep it there. If you're early in enrollment and things are not going well with a particular CRO, then by all means, maybe it makes sense to go ahead and make changes there if appropriate. So really the phase of where the study is in is just absolutely critical when evaluating any of these as far as integration. And you definitely want to make sure that you're doing risk assessments. How are things going? Are there mitigations that should be put into play? What other risks that you have with the overall study, and especially with partnering with individual CROs? And I don't know why I clicked down on this and it goes back up, so I apologize for these slides. The additional considerations to think about, again, we talked about poor performing CROs. If you have poor performing CROs, make sure you prioritize focusing with them first. Are there things that you can do to improve the situation? Do you go about doing that? Or do you decide that, they're the first ones that we're going to consolidate and move this to a different CRO, or maybe we can move it in-house. If you're a larger company and you have internal expertise and you have bandwidth, can or should you bring different operations in-house? Again, what is the current phase of the study? Does it make sense to bring it in-house based on how individual CROs are performing, based on the current phase of the study, how much longer before the study should be completed? Does it just make sense to keep with the CRO, assuming they're doing a good job? Do you want to leave ongoing studies running as is? Depending on the length of a particular study, it certainly makes sense. In my experience, I've worked with a number of different companies that Boston Scientific has acquired. And before joining the company, I was actually part of an acquired company as well. It's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about integrations, because unfortunately that was a bad experience where the company that acquired mine really didn't treat us very well. So I'm always very, very focused when I work on a project now to make sure that everyone from that acquiring company really has a good experience. And so, just try to figure out what's best for your individual study. For most of the situations that I've been part of, wherever we've acquired a company with studies ongoing, we've typically stayed with any CROs that were already with a particular study. That being said, we did do evaluations. We confirmed things were running well. We only really made changes if it was early in a study and if there was an issue with performance of a particular CRO. Otherwise, we typically would keep everything running as is and didn't make any changes. But for instance, whenever we were ready to do a new study, one product line that I was on, we kept everything. We had 2 randomized studies and one continued access study, and then 2 smaller studies currently ongoing at the time of the acquisition. We kept everything as is with the CROs, but when we kicked off a second continued access study to pair with the second randomized study, for that study, we did just do it all in-house per our processes, and I don't believe we used any CROs for that one. Other than we did have some statistical services with one of the CROs, and we did work with their statistician for some of the work, not the overall study, but where we had some comparisons between studies and where we wanted to do a meta-analysis at a point later in time. We did work with that statistician again, because that statistician had been on the prior studies. And so we gave him the data for the newer study as well. So as we work through the meta-analysis. Again, depending what phase you're on, do you want to consolidate your CROs? If indeed a company has multiple CROs across multiple studies, does it make sense to consolidate and bring some of that together, especially if there's any issues, and bringing it in with CROs that you have better relationships with, if that's the case. As far as just kind of the high level summary here, to make sure that we have about 20 minutes left for Q&A. A high level summary of all of the integration after you go through and you're evaluating where everything is at. What do you want to do with individual CROs? You're going to want to determine your strategy. You're kind of thinking through a lot of the strategy development when you're evaluating where each, how each CRO is performing and what phases of which studies they're part of. But you're going to want to document what your overall strategy is, and of course, individually for each study as well. As you determine what the strategy should be, are you going to stay with or move away from? You're going to want to line out what are all the actions that you need to do, the timelines. Never forget that you need to separate the immediate run the business from integration. In my experience, I've worked a handful of integrations over the past 25 years with Boston Scientific. And like I said, my first integration was actually prior to BSC, when I was part of a company that had been acquired. That was my startup company. We were very, very small startup. We had like 27 people, including temporary employees. So very, very small startup. And so it was interesting to experience from that perspective. And then maybe 10 years into my experience, or 8 years into my experience with BSC, I managed my first integration. And that was one where, because it was a smaller company that we'd acquired, I actually did a bit of the run the business and integration. And that was true for the next couple of integrations that I did as well. However, the one that I'm on right now and the one right before it was the first time that I had an experience of just doing run the business. I would have conversations with the folks handling integration, but for the most part, I was just very focused on how do we get this new product into an IDE in the United States? We have to get this product to PMA as quickly as possible. So, I was able to free up my time, and other people did integration, so I could just focus on the IDE. The current integration that I'm on, I actually have the opposite experience for the first time, where I'm only doing integration work. I'll have some discussions of run the business, but for the most part, I'm not doing really any of the run the business work. So when you're working on an integration and partnering between the acquiring company and the acquired company, you really do, keep in mind that you may be on one side or the other, or you may be doing both when it's a smaller type of acquisition. So really focus on that with the planning. You need to be careful when you do the planning, because some people will need to do not only run the business work, but will need to be working with you on some of the integration work. And you need to make sure that integration is as important as it is to do it fairly quickly and cleanly, and make sure everything is going well. You never want to get in the way of the run the business work. Run the business has got to be number one priority all the time, to make sure that everything is working well and running smoothly. So always keep that in mind when you're figuring out your planning. what actions need to be done, what timelines to do them in. They should take second seat to run the business, but yet you have to get the integration completed fairly efficiently as well. We tend to have a viewpoint. Boston Scientific does acquire a number of companies. We have a few acquisitions almost every year. And our goal is typically to complete a full integration within 2 years of the date of acquisition. Now, that is going to depend on the size of the company that's been acquired. When it's a company where it's maybe one product line, maybe a number of UPNs, but it's really one product, that with maybe multiple sizes or something, that is typically something that we're able to complete within 2 years. The one that I'm working with right now is actually a fairly good size company. I would call it more of a medium size, not a large, but a good medium sized company, and has been around for like 30, 35 years. So very mature and stable as well. But they have a fairly large number of product lines. Something like we downsized a bit before we brought it into our distribution system, but we're talking like 300-400 different UPNs across the globe. So from that perspective, it's a lot of work, and run the business needs to really focus first. And so for that integration, it's probably going to take us a little bit closer to 3 years, a little bit longer to integrate into our company. And then, of course, after you've determined your strategy and planned out what needs to be done and estimated timelines, you need to focus on your execution. As you've made your planning, you're going to focus first on what is your early integration? What needs to be done first? What is more critical that you really need to focus on? From the clinical focusing on CRO side, I would say that would be, those CROs that maybe aren't performing very well, where you need to make some changes. And then focus on your full integration, which not just at the CRO level, but higher for all the clinical studies, moving. Are you going to justify staying with all of the clinical work instructions and SOPs, or do you need to move that over to the acquiring company? And what does that look like? Or is it something like you can document and justify a quality plan that you're going to follow the prior work instructions and SOPs for ongoing studies, but new studies go into your new company's system? And then always and forever monitor and control. Make sure you have that feedback loop. Are things going well? Do you need to make additional modifications? Always focusing again on the people. We talked about that before. We always talk about it in companies, right? People are your most important resource. And making sure you keep people happy, reminding everyone that change is difficult. So being there to support each other and take care of each other, and kind of take that people first approach as well while you're focusing on making all of these changes. And that's what I have for integration. So are there any questions that you all have?